Okay, so this is Global Health, and I'm Gail Fraser. Now we're looking at Unit 3, Part 1. We're going to be talking about Afghanistan. So we were discussing the right to health as it relates to vulnerable populations, women's rights, and our case study about Afghanistan. Some of you may recognize this picture. It's quite a famous picture from National Geographic, and we will see this young woman as she is now, as an older, mature woman, later in the slides. So the elimination of discrimination against women is part of the United Nations covenants. So the UN Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination, you see this acronym CEWA, and discrimination based on gender alone, meaning whether you're a female or male, nullifies or impairs the enjoyment and rights of and full participation in communities. So women and girls should be treated the same as men and boys. So the elimination of discrimination, again, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees is one of the places that really is vigilant to protect women and children, especially when they are in refugee camps and most vulnerable. And a lot of progress has been made to protect vulnerable groups when they're displaced, or women that have been forced away from their homes. The Pan American Health Organization, or PAHO, again, they have different groups that are related to gender equality and access to healthcare services, because very often women are responsible for caring for children, yet they have limited access to resources to pay for those health services. And I know that Leonor Gomez, who is an advocate for human rights in Latin America, she wrote an article about gender equality and health service access, and that systematically she's documented that poverty inequities, unfair and unnecessary and avoidable inequities between men and women still exist in Latin America, and that in order to achieve equality, we have to improve women's access with their children to health services, and so making those cost minimal or free services available is one of the ways that we've been working on it. In Latin America, gender equality, again, in 2004, so this is more than 10 years ago, they hosted 6 studies in Barbados, Jamaica, Chile, Brazil, Colombia, so right here, Ecuador and Peru, to investigate the differences between these two countries, because you well know things are very different in Barbados and Jamaica than they are in Ecuador and Peru. Again, India and Pakistan, gender inequality is very acute here, especially in northern India. So women in Pakistan, they've made a lot of progress because they've stood up to protect their rights. Afghanistan, I think that very often the culture is preventing them from standing up for their rights because of the nature of the repression. The women are very limited mobility and are very strictly controlled by their husbands and their families. So again, we have different people reporting about cross-sectional survey. 5,000 women were interviewed, so that's quite a very strong survey. And she reported that some women, the primary problem is they don't have enough food. They need shelter, and they have limited access to water. So you can see these are all very basic things that we've been talking about, and the right to health and the right to life, to survive. You need shelter, food, water, and clothing. In Afghanistan, these disparities in health are quite acute, and the inequality is one of the ones that we highlight to show the inequity between men and women, or boys and girls. So again, the maternal deaths are enormous. They actually don't know how many women die in childbirth, and so it's because of limited access to health care, and most women in Afghanistan have their babies at home without a nurse or a skilled provider of any kind. 87% of the women had to obtain permission to seek medical care from their husband or other male member, their brother, their father, and only 1% reported to be able to have prenatal care. So these would prevent a lot of the deaths, maternal deaths during childbirth. So the mortality ratios, you can see, even though these numbers are old, they haven't changed a lot. You can see that the maternal mortality in sub-Saharan Africa is much higher. The darker the color, so the darker brown here in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and here in Afghanistan, and also here in Eritrea and Djibouti, and Somalia, these are the highest in the world. But you can see there are some countries in even Latin America that have higher than average rates of maternal mortality. The violations of women's rights in Afghanistan, again, we are well documented. And I think that I really admire the efforts of different journalists to realize that violations of women's human rights are often go unrecognized and unpunished and unremedied because this is part of the culture. It's an acceptable treatment of women, and legal protections of women and girls are necessary. And so very often they'll have things on paper, like we discussed in Venezuela and Brazil. They actually have documents saying that women have equal rights and should not be unprotected, yet they don't enforce those laws. In Afghanistan, they don't have those laws to protect women. So you can see here's Afghanistan. So here we have the African continent, Europe, and here's India. So you can see where Afghanistan is located, just northeast of the Saudi Arabian boot. Here's the country of Afghanistan, and Kabul is the capital. And this is where they have roads and they have a lot of commerce. But then other places you can see all along the border here with Iran and Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Pakistan, that there are lots of different places that are very remote that have little access to health care. You know that the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan has about 28 million people, so it's a huge country, but it has a lot of people in mountainous and it's a very harsh environment. And I think that that's one of the natural barriers that keeps the country separate from other countries. But it is strategically located in the Middle East, so it's much sought after. I know the Russians recently failed in their efforts, and again, the U.S. has troops in Afghanistan even now. So again, the Afghanistan is uniquely, the geographic location as well as the environment, the mountainous environment, keeps it sheltered within itself. And I know that there are lots of things that are going on in Afghanistan. You probably have seen it in the news about the Taliban and the different things happening with the government there. You can see Afghanistan is very mountainous, so these enormous white mountains you can see form this area around the biggest city of Kabul. So, and this is our woman. See, again, this is the young woman that we saw in the National Geographic. Here she is in the present day as a mature woman. But you can see these mountains are not anything to sniff at. These are really huge, sharp mountains. Again, the women, just like much of the Middle East, are required to wear coverings for their clothing. They cover their head, and they actually have a shield over their eyes even. This is exceptional coverage. In the Middle East, they have an abaya and they wear a shaila, but they don't have a mask that goes over the front of the face. They might have a veil, but again, Afghanistan has the most limiting types of clothing for women. You can see that this woman has the traditional type of covering for her eyes. And I know that in poor communities that have limited access to health care, that the maternal mortality is not even tabulated. It could be, an enormous number. So our case study has to do with women that are in these war-torn areas, and the fundamentalist Islamic ideas related to the ongoing violence, and it's an internal civil war. So you can see women are really very vulnerable so they're vulnerable because of the being displaced within their own home, but they're also subject to domestic violence. And this is where we bring in Nicholas Kristof, and his wife Cheryl Woodan are the ones that created the Half the Sky books and the game that we're going to be playing with this global health class. And I really admire the work they've done, because again, you may have heard of Rahan Yunus and the damage that she had to her face when her husband, who you should be able to love and trust, threw acid on her because he was upset with her. And again, these are the types of things that we want to fight against and rebel against and say that it's really wrong. And she actually ended up committing suicide after having many, many surgeries to try to restore her appearance. But she is one that was highlighted in the news, but there are lots of other women that have been attacked by their own brothers, their own fathers, their own husbands, because they felt like they had done something against the culture. The international vigilance, I guess, should be really strong to protect women and children, that they have rights and they should be treated with respect and dignity, and the laws should protect them. Health consequences of human rights violations deny people their right to health. And these are very basic tenets that we're discussing in global health. And denying access to basic services that protects women and children as being vulnerable populations leads to poor health outcomes. So again, we have to support women in developing countries, whether it's Afghanistan or Pakistan or other locations around the world, by giving them the knowledge. So we have our young woman here with a book with the knowledge that they have a right to these things, because I think that very often women and girls don't stand up for their rights, even though they could. So today we're going to continue our discussion about domestic violence in Afghanistan, the fact that in populations even in Colombia, we have children, women, elderly. These are all considered vulnerable population, families without homes. So it could be a whole family together, or people that are unemployed. Think of the case where we've got Maria Fernandez Nunez. She was a beauty queen, and unfortunately someone poured acid on her face again. For what reason? I don't know. It's a personal attack on her, and again, you could see her face and all the skin was destroyed. These acid attacks in women in Colombia are things that you've probably read about, and it is they have laws to protect people. We have women that are being advocates to try to protect themselves and to speak out against the violence against women, whether it is because they're vulnerable and displaced as a refugee, or whether they are exposed to domestic violence. So please log in to the class discussion for Unit 3 related to the right to health and the support that we need to provide for vulnerable populations. Answer the questions having to do with these attacks on vulnerable groups, the UN conventions for the elimination of discrimination against women and children, or consider the Afghanistan versus Colombia. You think, oh, Afghanistan is much, much worse. But you can see we had examples here, even in Colombia, where they had acid attacks. And what steps could we take to improve and reduce their vulnerability? This is Global Health, and I'm Gail Fraser. We're going to continue with Unit 3, and I'm going to give you a little quiz. But first, let's review the United Nations. Through international spending and enforcement of these UN covenants for protection of human rights, Colombia and all the countries in the world are making an investment to protect women, children, and displaced families. So when we look at the United States in particular, this is John Perkins, and he is admitting that the United States spends over $87 billion conducting a war in Iraq, while the United Nations estimate that less than half of that amount could provide clean water, adequate diets, sanitation services, and basic education for every person on the planet. $87 billion spent on war when it could have been spent on vulnerable populations and providing the basic needs for everyone. So this is from a book by John Perkins called The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. So let's go through our quiz. Let's see if you have gotten some of the ideas about vulnerable populations and the protections that are provided to them through the covenant through the United Nations. So quiz. Human rights are for men only. True or false? Okay. Hopefully you said false. Health services can be located anywhere without regard to accessibility or roads. Does that make sense? Very often I see these health facilities way up on a hill, and actually it's very hard for people to get to these remote locations. So that's false. You should never ask physicians or nurses questions. Of course, that's false. Yeah, you should always ask a question, especially when you have a health professional who would have a very good and knowledgeable answer. Quiz. Other people always know what is best for you. True or false? Obviously, you have to have a voice and participate in decision making. If you're a small child, you might have a smaller voice, and what is best for you counts, is the most important. Quiz. The right to health is only for rich people. True or false? I mean, actually, access to health care is very important to everyone, especially people who don't have resources or who are poor, because they have less easy access. The right to health should be first responsibility for every national government. True or false? Here we've got a true answer. I hope you can see that. Governments from all countries, rich and poor, do their best to help each other through the support of the United Nations. And by giving support to the United Nations, indirectly, they are supporting all the different covenants and programs that support those covenants to eliminate discrimination and make health more accessible. And that is true. Every individual has a right to health. We've been talking about that quite a bit. So this week we want to review the internally displaced persons, so IDPs. They might be displaced because of natural disasters or internal conflict, violence, war. So again, in Colombia we have almost 5 million internally displaced persons, and that's an enormous number. The only country that has more internally displaced persons besides Colombia is Sudan, and that has had decades of civil war. So I think that the seriousness of the conditions here in Colombia is something that we would like to talk about, and we're going to continue our discussion about human rights and public health. So again, I hope you have had a chance to look at this right to health. It's available in both English and Spanish to make it easy for you to review. And basic human needs, so access to clean water, food security, clothing, shelter, safety. Now that's a consideration that I've recently added to the list, and then also your right to participate in making decisions, so your social engagement. They're all really important. We did mention Amnesty International on a previous presentation. So that, again, this is an organization that stands up and documents the human rights abuses and reports it so that possibly they would be corrected. In Cambodia and Myanmar, if you want to compare the two, they both have pretty bad human rights records, but especially Myanmar, the former Burma. In Myanmar, widespread systematic human rights violations persist. So even today, Cambodia has experienced one of the most dreadful human rights records in modern history, where they just were murdering people. So again, here are your references if you'd like to read more about it. Members of the United Nations have gone in to document the human rights violations in Myanmar. There's no freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, or even association. So there are lots and lots of limitations on what people can do in Myanmar. It's famous for its repression of the ethnic minority as well as political activists. Again, it was a number of years ago, but 1,300 political prisoners were not allowed to have fair trials. They were just put in prison and basically threw away the key. These prisoners, including the National League for Democracy leaders, Aung San Suu Kyi, has been wrongfully denied her liberty, and actually recently she has been released and free. She's no longer in prison. The Myanmar state sanctioned torture and rape. Soldiers were allowed to brutalize women. So again, the human rights foundations around the world have been acting and trying to prevent violence against people that are vulnerable. In Cambodia, the condition is not that much different. The human rights situation is facing growing criticism. There are lots of unresolved assassinations. So again, when you disagree with the government, you should be able to have a free voice, and people would form an opinion whether they support you or whether they don't. But they don't have a right to just shoot you or assassinate you. Over the course of the last 30 years, Cambodia and the Khmer Rouge had lots and lots of documented human rights violations, even genocide. They were destroying whole ethnic groups within Cambodia. Trafficking of women and children for sexual exploitation. Networks of traffickers in Cambodia are famous even now, I'm afraid. Land confiscation, arbitrary arrests, domestic violence, abuse of children, again, is affecting people in Cambodia. So the case study we were comparing, we're looking at deprivation, so taking things away from people without a right, against the law. Insecurity, placing people in vulnerable positions where they feel like the police or military, who they should be able to trust, will be harmful to them. Discrimination against ethnic minorities and human trafficking. Here's a family in Myanmar. Vulnerable populations of concern would be, we have to have international vigilance, and we must be strong to protect, again, women and children. Health consequences of human rights are denying them their right to health. So we've discussed this in the previous unit. Even in Colombia, there's a critical need to improve public health access for internally displaced persons, or IDPs, or desplazados. 3 types of vulnerable population occur. Again, asylum seekers, so people in Colombia who've gone to Ecuador to flee violence, or people from Ethiopia or China who have come to other countries. Refugees, so people that are spilling out of Syria during the civil war into Lebanon or other countries adjacent. And then internally displaced people who are within their own country, like in Sudan, where they no longer can live in their homes, so they are out in refugee camps, but within their own country. You can see that the High Commission for Refugees has a lot of information and maps. Here we've got Colombia standing out as being a very big spot of internally displaced persons, but you have also these problems in Afghanistan, Sudan, and you can see the numbers. The size of the circle has to do with the numbers. So the biggest circle is 4 million. In 2012, the UN reported that the internally displaced persons in Colombia is still growing, so you can see that it's over 4 million here in the number on 2013. And again, we need to be looking toward our reading assignments for next week, have to do with the WHO, HIV, and human rights. And so we have our good luck team. So this was the Trinidad and Tobago Olympics in 2012. So this was a logo that I had put on here as a reminder that we were having the Olympics in 2012. So again, I think we'll stop here and we'll play a video for you. But I think that the violence and injuries leading to premature death are things that we need to talk about. So the Pan American Health Organization has information about homicides, suicides, accidents, and injuries, and attitudes toward violence. So let's quickly go through some of these slides. So again, this is in Colombia. US and Mexico, the rates of homicide are very high in North America as well as in Central America. South America, Brazil, and Argentina are compared in this chart, so you can see the rates per 100,000 even fairly recently was very high in Brazil in comparison and contrast to Argentina. Colombia and Ecuador, but again, here's Colombia in blue. Our bars are very high, so it's a way of comparing. Even though these are statistics from 2000, I'm afraid that a lot of this is still true. So again, we want to look at playing the game Half the Sky. So we'll be looking at ways that we can help and the experiences of the Rendica within our game. I can quickly go through some slides now. As you play the game, I would like you to save components that say with your snipping tool, because this is a Half the Sky is a game for Windows only. Unfortunately, they don't have an app that we can use our iPads. So as you're working through this game and doing the different steps to achieve complete your quests, I would like you to save your different achievements. So like this is an example where I was going through Half the Sky movement game, and I've gotten a congratulations. I got some credits for doing an activity. I know that when I was going through and I was picking mangoes, and I was going to sell those mangoes so we continue, so we get credit to make money with the different steps. Half the Sky has the dialogue boxes, which I kept open so that I could put it on mute, so you could still do it in the library or work on it when there's you wouldn't want to have the background sound. Here's another example where I've gotten 5 coins for the work that I've completed within Half the Sky, and now Radhika is taking her daughter to the clinic, and it costs money, so she had to earn other coins and get transportation to the clinics. So these are different things, the screens that you'll see, and here again I've gotten up to 7, so you can see that I've gotten a congratulations for the step 5 of 15, and then my reward, congratulations for achieving, I've become an advocate. So these are the types of steps that I want you to be saving as you complete different parts of your quests and complete the Half the Sky game, and everybody will have a different path through. I know that there will be times when you will see these pages. This is an example of one that came up, give a gift, change a life. So there is no need for you to actually donate money or give a gift or buy coins. It's an optional part of this game where they actually do fundraising, and it goes to the NGOs. But here again, this is an example where you donate to Shot for Life, and there's no need to purchase any of these things. You go through the game. I want to remind you it's a window-based game, and let me know if you have any questions on the forum discussion forum. Thank you.